The asphalt of Illinois Route 53 still held the brutal heat of a July afternoon, even as midnight crept closer on a sweltering Tuesday. In the affluent suburb of Oak Brook, west of Chicago, the night air hung thick and motionless. This was the kind of manicured community where crime barely registered on the ledger. High hedges, long private driveways, and an unspoken understanding about who belonged and who was simply passing through. The Oak Brook Police Department spent most of its quiet shifts answering noise complaints and gently persuading teenagers to leave the golf course after dark. Officer Caleb Rourke stood near the trunk of his cruiser, sweat soaking through the dark blue uniform he had pressed that afternoon. 23 years old and only 6 months out of the academy, he carried himself with the restless energy of a man desperate to matter. His tactical belt felt heavy with equipment he had barely used. Caffeine and adrenaline mixed in his blood. He wanted a real arrest, the kind that would put his name on the captain's desk and prove he belonged. Leaning against the hood, smoking a cheap cigar, was Officer Hank Voss. 20 years on the job had left Voss with a soft gut that strained his belt and a permanent cynical squint. To the young rookie, Voss was more than a training officer. He was the living embodiment of street wisdom. "You're too stiff, kid," Voss muttered, flicking ash onto the glowing pavement. "You're checking expiration dates on stickers. Any idiot can write a ticket for an expired tag. A real cop looks at the driver, hands, eyes, whether the pieces fit." Rourke adjusted his vest. "What do you mean, fit?" Voss gestured down the dark, tree-lined stretch of road where a few cars slowed for the DUI and safety checkpoint. Orange flares threw dancing shadows across his weathered face. "Look at the car, then look at the man. Does the guy in a rusted-out Civic belong in a neighborhood where the houses start at $3 million? Does the guy in a $100,000 luxury sedan look like he earned it, or like he stole it? Find the anomaly, kid. Find the crime." It was a flawed, deeply prejudiced philosophy dressed up as hard-earned instinct. But to Caleb Rourke, eager, impressionable, and hungry for validation, it sounded like the secret language of legends. He nodded, chewing his lower lip, eyes fixed on the approaching headlights. The checkpoint had been set up at a natural choke point near the county line, supposedly to catch drunk drivers coming out of the city. So far, it had produced nothing but a soccer mom who had forgotten her wallet and a tired plumber heading home from a late call. Rourke's frustration was climbing. "Here comes one," Voss said, crushing the last of his cigar under his boot. He pointed his heavy flashlight down the road. "Take the lead on this one, Caleb. Show me you're learning." A pair of crisp LED headlights cut through the humid haze. The car moved slowly, precisely at the speed limit, gliding toward the orange cones with heavy, silent grace. Under the harsh glare of the portable halogen lights, Rourke saw it clearly. A 2024 charcoal gray Lincoln Continental, paint immaculate, windows tinted darker than the legal limit. "Out-of-state plates," Voss whispered from behind him, voice low and conspiratorial. "Virginia tags, dark tint, rolling into Oak Brook at 11:37 at night. What's your gut tell you?" Rourke's pulse quickened. His hand rested on the butt of his flashlight. "Doesn't fit." "Exactly. Light him up." Rourke stepped into the lane and raised his hand in a sharp, authoritative gesture. The Lincoln came to a smooth, silent stop 3 feet away. He drew a deep breath, chest expanding beneath the Kevlar vest. In that moment of youthful arrogance, he felt only the thrill of the hunt. He approached the driver's side, boots crunching on loose gravel. He unclipped his high-lumen tactical flashlight and adopted the wide, aggressive stance Voss had encouraged over the past 6 months. The dark-tinted glass hummed downward. A wave of cool, conditioned air spilled into the humid night, carrying the faint scent of expensive leather and subtle cologne. Inside, a low volume of Mozart played through a high-end sound system. The man behind the wheel was Malcolm Reed. At 58, he possessed a quiet, commanding presence that usually entered a room before he did. He wore a bespoke navy suit, white shirt still crisp after a 16-hour day and a chaotic flight, tie loosened just enough to breathe. His salt and pepper hair was neatly cropped. His hands rested lightly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Malcolm Reed had given 35 years to law enforcement. He had started as a beat cop on the south side of Chicago, risen through the DEA, transferred to the FBI, and built a career dismantling transnational crime networks. 3 weeks earlier, after a unanimous Senate confirmation, he had been sworn in as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was in Illinois to meet quietly with a Joint Task Force commander the next morning. Preferring to avoid the noise of a full security detail, he had chosen a discreet government fleet vehicle and simply wanted to reach his hotel and sleep. Rourke aimed the blinding beam of his flashlight directly into Reed's face. Reed did not flinch. He narrowed his eyes slightly against the glare and turned his head. "Good evening, officer." "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Rourke barked, keeping the light locked on Reed's eyes. "Would you mind lowering the light a fraction, son? It's a bit blinding, and my hands are in plain sight." The word son struck Rourke's ego like a match to dry tinder. "He's testing you," he thought, echoing Voss's lessons. "Trying to establish dominance." "I'll decide where the light goes, sir. I asked for your documents. Where are you coming from tonight?" Reed sighed softly, a microscopic movement of his shoulders. He recognized the tone at once. He had heard it 1,000 times in his career. And long before that, he had experienced it from the other side of the badge, growing up on the south side. It was the sound of a young officer who was scared, overcompensating, and looking for a reason to escalate. "I'm traveling from the airport," Reed answered evenly, hands remaining visible. "Heading to the Marriott in Oak Brook." "That's a long way from Virginia," Rourke noted, eyes darting around the pristine interior. "Whose car is this?" "It belongs to my employer." "And who is your employer?" Rourke leaned closer, invading the space. "The federal government," Reed said simply. From a few feet back, Voss chuckled, a mocking, ugly sound. He stepped up beside Rourke and shone his own light into the back seat. "Federal government, huh? Let me guess. Secret agent on a highly classified mission in the suburbs." Reed turned his gaze to the older officer. His eyes were cold, assessing. He read Voss instantly. The burned-out veteran, the cynical instigator. The real danger here was not the rookie's aggression. It was the veteran's permission. "I am a federal employee." "Yes." Reed's voice dropped an octave, carrying a subtle warning. "My identification is in my breast pocket. My driver's license is in my wallet in the center console. I am going to reach for the console now to retrieve my license." "Keep your hands on the wheel!" Rourke shouted suddenly, hand dropping to the holster of his service weapon. The sudden panic in the rookie's voice shattered the quiet night. Reed froze. He did not argue. He did not make a sudden movement. He simply kept his hands firmly on the leather rim. "My hands are on the wheel, officer. I am complying with your orders. I was simply narrating my actions so you wouldn't be startled." "You don't tell me what you're doing. You do what I say." Rourke's heart hammered against his ribs. Adrenaline drowned out training. He looked at Reed. The expensive suit, the calm demeanor, the luxury car, the refusal to act intimidated. And in his biased, panicked mind, this was not a citizen. This was a high-level trafficker. It had to be. "Step out of the vehicle." "Officer," Reed said, tone shifting from polite to firmly authoritative. "I have not committed a traffic infraction. I am perfectly sober. I have answered your questions. You are extending this stop without reasonable, articulable suspicion. I suggest you take my driver's license, run it, and let me go on my way." "I said step out of the damn car!" Rourke yelled, yanking the door handle. It was locked. He banged his fist against the window frame. "Unlock the door and step out, or I will break this window." "Brad, watch his hands," Voss warned from the side, feeding the paranoia. "Guy's too calm. He's hiding something. Malcolm Reed closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He knew the law perfectly. He knew his rights. But he also knew the grim statistics of what happens when a black man argues with an agitated armed police officer on a dark road, regardless of who that man is. "I am unlocking the door," Reed said clearly. "I am stepping out." The heavy door of the Lincoln swung open. Reed stepped onto the asphalt. At 6'2", he towered over the young officer. He did not posture or puff out his chest, but his sheer presence seemed to shrink Rourke. "Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car." Rourke's voice trembled slightly as he drew his taser. The bright yellow plastic glowed ominously under the streetlights. Reed turned slowly, placing his large, manicured hands flat on the cool metal of the Lincoln's roof. "Officer," he said, staring straight ahead at the dark tree line, "I want to be very clear with you. You are making a profound mistake. I am fully cooperating, but you are crossing a legal line that will have severe professional consequences for you." "Shut up!" Rourke stepped in close and kicked Reed's feet apart aggressively. He holstered the taser and began a rough, invasive pat-down, hands slapping harshly against the fine wool of Reed's trousers. He felt the wallet in the back pocket, snatched it out, and tossed it onto the roof of the car. Voss was now illuminating the interior of the Lincoln. "Hey, Caleb, look at this." Rourke turned. Sitting on the floorboard of the back seat was a sleek, reinforced metallic briefcase. Heavy-duty, the kind used for secure transport, secured with a biometric lock and a heavy steel padlock. "What's in the case?" Rourke demanded, stepping back, but keeping his hand hovering near his belt. "That is a secure diplomatic pouch containing classified federal documents," Reed said evenly, not turning around. "It belongs to the Department of Justice. You do not have a warrant. You do not have probable cause. And you absolutely do not have my consent to search this vehicle or that case." "Classified documents, my ass," Voss laughed, leaning into the window. "Looks like a cash drop to me. Or maybe, wait. Hey, Caleb, you think a guy driving through Oak Brook at midnight with out-of-state tags and a locked metal briefcase might be moving something he shouldn't?" Rourke's eyes went wide. A drug bust. A money laundering bust. This was it. This was his ticket to the detective bureau. He had caught a cartel lawyer or a major distributor. "Sir, you are being detained on suspicion of trafficking." He reached for his handcuffs. "Put your hands behind your back." For the first time that night, a flash of genuine anger broke through Malcolm Reed's ironclad composure. He slowly turned his head to look over his shoulder at the young cop. "Officer Rourke," Reed said, reading the name tag. The temperature in his voice dropped to absolute 0. It was the voice that had made hardened mafia bosses sweat in interrogation rooms. "Before you put those handcuffs on me, I want you to listen very carefully. In my left inner breast pocket is a leather case. Inside that case is a badge and an identification card. I am ordering you to take it out and look at it before you end your career right here on this asphalt." Rourke hesitated. The absolute certainty in Reed's voice was unnerving. It was not the manic bluffing of a criminal caught in a lie. It was the cold, heavy truth of a man who held immense power. But then Voss walked up behind Reed, grabbed his left wrist with unnecessary force, and twisted it backward. "Stop giving orders, buddy. You're not in charge here. Cuff him, Caleb. If he's got a fake federal badge, that's just another felony we can tack on." The hesitation vanished, replaced by the toxic need to please his superior. Rourke stepped in, grabbed Reed's right arm, and snapped the cold steel bracelet onto his wrist. He pulled the arms together and secured the left wrist. Click, click, click. The sound of the ratchets tightening echoed sharply in the muggy night air. Malcolm Reed, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, stood handcuffed on the side of a suburban road. He did not struggle. He did not curse. He simply looked at Officer Caleb Rourke with a profound, terrifying pity. "You had your chance, son," Reed whispered. Rourke grabbed the wallet off the roof of the car. His hands shook slightly from the adrenaline as he flipped it open and pulled out the driver's license. He shone his flashlight onto the plastic card. The name read Malcolm Reed. The address was a high-security residential complex in Alexandria, Virginia. "All right, Artie," Voss sneered, walking back toward the cruiser to grab the radio mic. "Let's run you through the system and see how many warrants you've got hiding under that fancy suit." As Voss picked up the radio to run the name through the National Crime Information Center, Rourke finally noticed the subtle detail he had missed in his panic. Reed was wearing a small, almost invisible, clear coiled earpiece tucked neatly behind his right ear. It was not a Bluetooth headset for music. It was a secure communications receiver. Before Voss could even key his microphone, the squad car's radio erupted with a burst of heavy static, overriding the local frequency with a high-powered encrypted transmission. A sharp, authoritative female voice cut through the speaker, booming into the silent night. "Oak Brook Unit 7, this is Federal Task Force Command. Step away from the vehicle and step away from the director. I repeat, step away from the director immediately." Rourke froze. The driver's license slipped from his sweaty fingers onto the pavement. He looked at Reed. Reed simply stared back, expression carved from stone. The voice on the radio did not sound like the tired, overworked dispatchers at the county communications center. It was perfectly modulated, unnervingly calm, and entirely devoid of the background hum of police scanners. It sounded like an executive order delivered over a secure satellite uplink. Officer Caleb Rourke stood paralyzed, the plastic of Malcolm Reed's driver's license resting by the toe of his right boot. The night air, previously thick with the oppressive heat of summer and the chirping of crickets, suddenly felt like a vacuum. Officer Hank Voss, however, had spent 2 decades surviving on a stubborn refusal to ever be wrong. His face flushed a deep, ugly red under the halogen checkpoint lights. He snatched the microphone from its cradle on the cruiser's dashboard, thumb pressing down hard on the transmit button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7, Voss barked, voice laced with venom. "We are getting unauthorized interference on the primary tactical channel. Someone is spoofing our frequency. Trace it and lock them out. We have a felony suspect in custody." The radio crackled instantly. It was not the local dispatcher. "Oak Brook Unit 7. This is Supervisory Special Agent Claire Donovan, FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, operating under federal command. We are not spoofing your frequency. We have overridden your local repeater. The man you have in handcuffs is Malcolm Reed, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are currently committing a felony under Title 18, Section 111 of the United States Code, assaulting and detaining a federal officer. Do not move. Do not attempt to transport the director. Do not touch your weapons. Acknowledge." Voss stared at the radio, mouth slightly open, the cigar ash on his shirt suddenly looking very pathetic. The veteran cop's brain short-circuited. He looked from the radio to the towering black man handcuffed by his cruiser to the terrified rookie beside him. "It's a high-tech crew," Voss whispered, though the bravado was gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening dread. "They've got a scanner set up. Caleb, put him in the back of the cruiser now." "Hank," Rourke stammered, eyes wide, hand trembling as it hovered inches from his service weapon. "Hank, look at his license. It says Malcolm Reed. He told us he was—" "Put him in the car!" Voss yelled, stepping toward Reed. Before Voss could close the distance, the ground began to vibrate. It started as a low rumble felt through the soles of their boots before escalating into the distinct, aggressive roar of high-performance engines being pushed to their absolute limits. From the north end of Route 53, the direction Reed had been traveling, 2 pairs of headlights materialized from the darkness, moving at a terrifying speed. Simultaneously, from the south end, the affluent heart of Oak Brook, another pair of headlights appeared. They were not using sirens. They were not using flashing light bars. They were moving in absolute predatory silence. "What the hell?" Rourke backed away from Reed, flashlight dropping to his side. Within seconds, the vehicles were upon them. 3 identical matte black Chevrolet Suburbans with heavily reinforced front grilles and dark armored glass. The lead Suburban from the north executed a violently precise J-turn, heavy tires screaming against the asphalt, kicking up a thick cloud of acrid white smoke. It slammed to a halt diagonally across the northbound lane, completely blocking the checkpoint. The second Suburban boxed in Rourke's police cruiser, putting its heavy steel bumper mere inches from the driver's side door. The third vehicle from the south blocked the rear, sealing the local cops inside a steel cage. The doors of the Suburbans flew open simultaneously. The coordination was flawless, a brutal ballet of tactical precision that made Rourke's 6 months of academy training look like a child's game. 6 heavily armed agents stepped out. They were not wearing the windbreakers with the bright yellow FBI letters that Rourke had seen in the movies. These men and women were outfitted in full tactical gear: Crye precision plate carriers, Kevlar helmets, night vision mounts, and short-barreled Daniel Defense M4 rifles. They moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency. "Hands away from your belts. Step away from the director." The voice belonged to the woman who had spoken on the radio. Supervisory Special Agent Claire Donovan stepped out from the passenger side of the lead Suburban. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a sharp tactical suit, badge clipped prominently to her belt next to a Glock 19. She did not have her weapon drawn, but the 4 agents flanking her had their rifles at the low ready, laser sights painting small, dancing green dots across the chests of Voss and Rourke. Rourke's hand shot up instantly, trembling so violently he could hear the Velcro on his own sleeves rustling. He backed up until his spine hit the side of his cruiser. He could not breathe. The air felt too thick. Voss, however, was a dinosaur who refused to recognize the meteor. He kept his right hand resting stubbornly on his gun belt. "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" he shouted, voice cracking. "This is our jurisdiction. You guys are out of your jurisdiction. We have a suspected trafficker." "Agent Pierce," Donovan said coldly, not even looking at Voss. One of the tactical agents, a massive man with shoulders like a linebacker, stepped forward, closed the distance to Voss in 2 strides, grabbed the veteran officer by the tactical vest, and effortlessly slammed him against the hood of the police cruiser. The heavy thud of Voss's body hitting the metal echoed in the night. Pierce expertly stripped Voss of his service weapon in less than a second, tossing it clattering onto the asphalt. "Do not speak," Agent Pierce growled directly into Voss's ear. "Do not move. If you twitch, I will consider it a threat to the director." Rourke watched his training officer, the man who was supposed to know everything, the man who had ordered him to make the arrest, get neutralized like a minor nuisance. Rourke's knees felt like water. The career he had dreamed of, the badge he had polished just 3 hours ago, it was all disintegrating before his eyes. Agent Donovan walked directly to Malcolm Reed. She did not look at the cops. She focused entirely on the man in the bespoke suit. "Director Reed," she said, tone softening just a fraction, projecting immense respect. "Are you injured, sir?" Malcolm Reed stood exactly where he had been placed. He had not flinched during the screeching tires or the tactical assault. He looked calmly at Agent Donovan. "I am uninjured, Agent Donovan. However, my current attire is a bit restrictive." Donovan turned her head slowly, fixing her gaze on rookie Officer Caleb Rourke. Her eyes were devoid of any sympathy. "Officer," she said, holding out an open, gloved hand. "The keys to the handcuffs. Right now." Rourke scrambled frantically at his duty belt. His fingers were numb, clumsy, fumbling with the small leather pouch that held his handcuff keys. He dropped them twice on the asphalt before finally scooping them up. He took a timid step forward, extending his hand like a child offering an apology. Agent Donovan snatched the keys from his palm. She stepped behind the director and quickly unlocked the steel cuffs. Click, click. The sound of the cuffs opening was deafening in Rourke's ears. It sounded like the slamming of a prison door. Malcolm Reed brought his arms forward, slowly rolling his shoulders and rubbing the red indentations on his wrists. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, the very pocket he had told Rourke about 20 minutes ago, and pulled out a sleek black leather credential case. He flipped it open. Under the harsh glare of the halogen checkpoint lights and the tactical flashlights of the federal agents, the gold shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed brightly. Next to it was an ID card bearing Reed's stern face and the title, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Reed walked slowly toward Rourke. The rookie shrank back against the cruiser, pressing himself flat against the doors. "Officer Rourke," Reed said. His voice was not raised. He was not yelling. He was using a quiet, professorial tone that was infinitely more terrifying than Voss's loudest shouts. "Do you know the ruling of Terry versus Ohio?" Rourke swallowed hard. His throat was sandpaper. "Yes, sir. Stop and frisk requires reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime is afoot." "Correct." Reed stopped 2 feet away from the young cop. "Now I want you to articulate to me, legally and precisely, what your suspicion was when you pulled me over. Not what Officer Voss told you to think. What you saw." You, Rourke stammered. "Out-of-state plates, dark windows. You were driving a nice car in a nice neighborhood late at night." "Is it a crime to drive a registered vehicle late at night?" Reed asked softly. "No, sir." "Is it a crime to drive through Oak Brook?" "No, sir." "You looked at my skin," Reed said, the words hitting like physical blows. "You looked at my car. You looked at the neighborhood. And you decided, without a single shred of empirical evidence, that I did not belong. When I calmly asserted my Fourth Amendment rights, you escalated. When I informed you of my federal status, you ignored it, choosing to believe the cynical narrative of an older officer who has likely been poisoning this department for 2 decades. Reed turned his attention to Voss, who was still pinned against the hood by Agent Pierce. "And you," Reed said, voice dropping an octave, ringing with absolute authority. "You are a disgrace to that uniform. You teach young men to govern by fear and prejudice. You saw a locked federal case, and your mind went to cartel money because your imagination cannot comprehend a black man carrying state secrets." I didn't know who you were," Voss mumbled, the fight entirely beaten out of him. "It shouldn't matter who I am," Reed suddenly roared, the first crack in his iron composure. The sheer force of his voice made Rourke jump. It shouldn't require the director of the FBI to receive basic constitutional respect on an American road. What would you have done if I was just an accountant, a teacher? Would you have beaten me? Planted something? You are a dangerous liability to the citizens you are sworn to protect. Just then, a sleek black Ford Explorer with local municipal plates sped past the blockade of Suburbans, lights flashing silently. It slammed on the brakes, and Chief Everett Lang of the Oak Brook Police Department tumbled out. Lang was a politician in a uniform, a man who survived by keeping the wealthy residents happy and the crime statistics low. He looked like he had just woken from a nightmare, uniform shirt untucked, face pale and sweating profusely. He had received a call directly from the United States Attorney General's office 5 minutes earlier, waking him from a dead sleep to inform him that his officers had just detained the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the country. "Director Reed! Director Reed! I am so profoundly sorry." Chief Lang practically sprinted toward the group, waving his hands in a gesture of pure surrender. "This is a catastrophic misunderstanding. I assure you, this does not represent the Oak Brook Police Department." Reed turned to face the chief. "Chief Lang, your officers unlawfully detained me, threatened me with a taser, ignored my identification, illegally searched my person, and placed me in handcuffs. I was subjected to racial profiling and profound incompetence." Lang looked at Rourke, then at Voss. If looks could kill, both men would have been reduced to ash on the asphalt. "Director, they are fired. Both of them. Immediately," Lang blurted, desperate to stop the bleeding. You don't have the union authority to fire them on the spot, Chief, and we both know it, Reed said coldly. But you do have the authority to suspend police powers, and I have the authority to initiate a federal civil rights investigation into this department, which will start tomorrow morning at 0800 hours. Lang paled even further. A federal probe would destroy the department and his pension. What do you want, Director? Name it. Reed looked at Officer Rourke. He saw a young man who had been handed a gun and a badge without the wisdom or the courage to use them correctly. He saw a kid who had traded his morality for the approval of a toxic mentor. Officer Rourke, Reed commanded. Step forward. Rourke shuffled forward, head bowed, tears of absolute humiliation and fear burning in his eyes. You do not possess the maturity, the judgment, or the restraint required to enforce the laws of this nation, Reed said, slowly, ensuring every word landed with devastating precision. You are easily manipulated, and you rely on intimidation to mask your fear. I will not allow you to wear that shield. Reed extended his hand toward the young officer. Chief Lang is officially stripping you of your police powers, Reed stated, eyes locking onto Rourke's. Take off your badge, Caleb. Hand it to me. Rourke choked back a sob. He looked at Voss, who would not meet his eyes. He looked at his chief, who nodded frantically, silently screaming at him to comply. With trembling fingers, Officer Caleb Rourke reached up to his chest. He fumbled with the heavy brass pin that held the Oak Brook police badge to his uniform, the badge he had sworn an oath to just 6 months ago, the badge he had taken selfies with, the badge he had used to terrorize an innocent man tonight. He unclasped it. The metal felt cold and heavy in his hand. Slowly, agonizingly, he placed the silver and blue shield into the outstretched palm of Malcolm Reed. Reed closed his fist around the badge. He did not gloat. He did not smile. He just looked sad. Agent Donovan, Reed said, turning away from the ruined rookie. Secure my briefcase. We are leaving. Yes, sir. Donovan walked to the Lincoln, opened the back door, and retrieved the heavy metallic case, carrying it back to the lead Suburban. Agent Pierce stepped away from Voss, leaving the older man slumped against the police cruiser, breathing heavily, his career effectively over, his pension in grave jeopardy. Have a good night, gentlemen, Reed said softly. He turned his back on them and walked toward the idling federal convoy. He climbed into the back of the armored Suburban. The doors slammed shut with a heavy final thud. The engines roared, and in perfect unison, the 3 black vehicles executed a synchronized turn, peeling away into the humid summer night, leaving Officer Caleb Rourke standing on the side of the road, staring at the empty space on his chest where his future used to be. The silence that descended on Route 53 after the federal convoy disappeared was absolute, broken only by the hum of the portable halogen floodlights and the erratic, heavy breathing of Chief Everett Lang. For a long minute, nobody moved. Caleb Rourke stood frozen, staring at his empty uniform shirt. The fabric where his badge had rested for 6 months felt unnaturally light, yet a crushing weight pressed down on his chest. Hank Voss leaned heavily against the side of the cruiser, rubbing his shoulder where Agent Pierce had slammed him, his face an ashen mask of realization. He was a man who had just watched his pension, his reputation, and his freedom evaporate in the span of 10 minutes. Chief Lang finally turned, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He did not yell. He did not scream. When he spoke, his voice was a lethal, quiet hiss that cut through the humid air, sharper than any shout. "Do you have any idea," Lang began, hands trembling as he pointed a finger at Voss, "what you have just done? You didn't just end your careers tonight. You ended mine. You ended this department. By 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the Department of Justice is going to descend on Oak Brook like a plague of locusts. Every arrest you've ever made, every ticket you've ever written, every piece of evidence you've ever logged is going to be scrutinized by federal prosecutors looking for a reason to put us in federal prison." "Chief, he was driving a suspicious vehicle," Voss tried to argue, though his voice lacked its usual arrogant gravel. He refused to cooperate. "We were following standard interdiction protocols." "Shut your mouth!" Lang roared, finally losing his composure, voice echoing off the surrounding trees. "Standard interdiction protocols? You handcuffed the director of the FBI without reasonable suspicion. You humiliated him on a public road. You are done, Hank. You are stripped of your powers. You are suspended without pay, and I am personally recommending the district attorney file false imprisonment charges against you." Lang turned his furious gaze to Rourke. The rookie flinched, shrinking back against the cruiser. "And you," Lang spat, eyes filled with disgust. "You let this washed-out relic turn you into a thug. You had the academy fresh in your mind. You knew the law, but you wanted to play the tough guy. Get your gear out of the cruiser. You are walking home." "Chief, please," Rourke begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes, cutting tracks through the sweat on his face. "I was just doing what my training officer told me to do. I didn't know." "Ignorance of the law is not an excuse for the citizens we arrest, Rourke. And it sure as hell isn't an excuse for the men wearing the badge," Lang replied coldly. "Walk, now." The fallout was swifter and more brutal than even Chief Lang had predicted. At exactly 8 a.m. the next morning, a fleet of unmarked federal vehicles pulled into the parking lot of the Oak Brook Police Department. Supervisory Special Agent Claire Donovan walked through the double-glass doors, flanked by a dozen agents and 2 federal prosecutors. They did not ask for permission. They presented a sweeping federal warrant, seizing the department's servers, body camera footage, dash cam hard drives, and 20 years' worth of internal affairs files. For the next 2 months, Oak Brook became ground zero for one of the most aggressive civil rights audits in state history. The wealthy residents who had previously loved their quiet, aggressive police force suddenly found themselves the center of a humiliating national media spectacle. Caleb Rourke spent those 2 months confined to his small 1-bedroom apartment, drowning in a toxic mix of shame and depression. He had been officially terminated from the force, his name plastered across local news blogs. He was radioactive. No security firm would hire him. No other department would even look at his resume. He spent his days working under the table, doing demolition for a local construction crew, tearing down walls and hauling drywall just to pay his rent. But as the physical exhaustion of construction work cleared his head, the panic of that night began to subside, replaced by a lingering, nagging question. Rourke sat on his battered couch one evening, nursing a cheap beer, replaying the traffic stop in his mind for the 1,000th time. He remembered Voss's unnatural excitement. He remembered Voss explicitly looking for an out-of-state luxury car. But most importantly, he remembered what Voss had said when he shone his light on Director Reed's metallic briefcase in the back seat. "Looks like a cash drop to me. Or maybe, wait. Hey Caleb, you think a guy driving through Oak Brook at midnight with out-of-state tags and a locked metal briefcase might be moving something he shouldn't?" Why was Voss so sure it was cash? Why did he immediately assume a lone driver in a luxury car was a courier? Rourke opened his laptop. He had kept his personal notes from his 6 months on the force. He began to cross-reference the dates and times of the checkpoints Voss had specifically requested they set up. He cross-referenced them with the arrests they had made. A chilling pattern began to emerge. Every single time Voss requested a checkpoint on Route 53, it was always late at night, always on a Tuesday or Wednesday. And in the 3 instances where they had actually pulled over suspected drug couriers, minor players moving through the county, Voss had always volunteered to process the vehicles and log the evidence himself, sending Rourke away to handle the suspects. Rourke's blood ran cold. Voss wasn't profiling Malcolm Reed because he was a zealous, racist cop looking for a bust. Voss was profiling him because Voss was hunting for cartel couriers to rob. The veteran officer was using the badge to run his own highway robbery operation. He had seen the locked metal briefcase, assumed it was filled with illicit cash, and was fully prepared to manufacture a felony arrest just to get his hands on it. The racism was simply the convenient tool he used to justify the stop to his rookie. Rourke stared at the screen. He was a disgraced, fired cop. Nobody would believe him, but he knew with absolute certainty that if he stayed silent, Voss would eventually cut a plea deal on the civil rights charges and slink away into a quiet retirement. Rourke picked up his phone. He did not call the local district attorney. He did not call Chief Lang. He searched online for the number of the local FBI field office. The interrogation room at the federal building in Chicago was nothing like the ones in Oak Brook. It was sterile, freezing cold, and smelled faintly of ozone and stale coffee. Caleb Rourke sat at the stainless steel table, hands folded nervously in front of him. He was wearing his only decent suit, though it hung slightly loose on his frame after 2 months of manual labor and stress. The heavy door clicked open. Agent Claire Donovan walked in, carrying a thick manila folder. She did not offer a handshake. She sat down across from him, opening the folder and aligning the documents perfectly. "Mr. Rourke," Donovan said, tone strictly professional, deliberately avoiding the title of officer. "You called the tip line and said you had information pertaining to the ongoing federal audit of the Oak Brook Police Department, specifically regarding Hank Voss." "Yes, ma'am," Rourke said, voice steady, despite the rapid beating of his heart. "I believe Hank Voss was using selective checkpoints to intercept and steal illicit currency from low-level drug couriers passing through our jurisdiction." Agent Donovan's expression did not change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "That is a very heavy accusation to level against a former colleague, Mr. Rourke, especially coming from someone currently facing potential civil liability for a false arrest. Are you looking for immunity?" "I don't care about immunity," Rourke said firmly, surprising himself with his own conviction. "I know I messed up. I know I was a coward that night, and I let him push me into violating a man's rights. I have to live with that. But you need to look at the impound logs for April 12th, May 4th, and June 18th. Look at the cash seizures Voss reported versus the street value of the narcotics in those cars. Then pull his personal bank records, or look for a safety deposit box rented under his wife's maiden name." Donovan stopped writing. She looked up at Rourke, truly seeing him for the first time since that humid night on Route 53. "You investigated this yourself?" "I just connected the dots," Rourke replied quietly. When he saw Director Reed's locked briefcase, he wasn't looking for evidence. He was looking for a payday. He thought Director Reed was a courier. Agent Donovan stared at him in silence for a long moment. She closed the folder. "Wait here." Rourke sat alone in the freezing room for exactly 45 minutes. He did not check his phone. He just stared at his reflection in the two-way mirror, seeing a young man who had finally stopped letting other people dictate his morality. When the door finally opened again, it was not Agent Donovan who stepped through. It was Malcolm Reed. The director of the FBI was dressed in a pristine charcoal suit, projecting the same overwhelming quiet authority he had possessed on the night of the traffic stop. He walked into the room and took the seat opposite Rourke. Rourke immediately stood up, posture stiffening to attention. "Director Reed." "Sit down, Caleb," Reed said, deep baritone filling the small room. Rourke sat, unable to maintain eye contact, gaze dropping to the steel table. "Agent Donovan ran the dates you provided," Reed began, intertwining his fingers on the table. "Our forensic accountants cross-referenced Voss's financial disclosures. We secured a warrant for a storage unit rented 2 towns over under an alias. Inside, we found approximately $250,000 in shrink-wrapped cash, along with 3 unregistered firearms and a collection of stolen luxury watches." Rourke let out a slow, shaky breath. "He was a criminal." "He was," Reed agreed. "And tomorrow morning, Hank Voss will be arrested by federal agents on charges of extortion, grand larceny, deprivation of rights under color of law, and wire fraud. He is going to federal prison for a very long time." Silence hung in the air. "Why did you bring this to us, Caleb?" Reed asked, leaning forward slightly. "You had nothing to gain. Your career in law enforcement is over. This won't get you your badge back. I know, Rourke said, finally looking up to meet the director's eyes. I don't want the badge back, sir. I didn't deserve it in the first place. I wanted it because I thought it made me powerful. I let Voss convince me that the uniform gave me the right to judge people based on what they looked like or where they drove. I took this to you because it was the right thing to do. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to do the right thing without a piece of metal on my chest telling me to do it. Malcolm Reed studied the young man. The anger and disappointment he had felt on that highway were gone, replaced by a solemn respect. In his 35 years in law enforcement, Reed had seen countless corrupt cops. But he had rarely seen a disgraced one try to genuinely balance the scales. Integrity, Caleb, is what you do when no one is watching, and when there is no reward to be had, Reed said softly. You failed a critical test on Route 53. You allowed fear and prejudice to override your duty. But today, you passed a much harder test. Reed reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple embossed business card. He slid it across the stainless steel table. You will never be a police officer again, Reed stated, an immovable fact. That door is closed, but my bureau employs thousands of civilian analysts, logistical coordinators, and support staff. People who need to understand the dark side of human nature, and people who have learned, the hard way, the value of the law. Rourke stared at the card. It did not have a specific title, just a phone number for the regional HR director of the FBI's administrative division. Take some time, Reed said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. Figure out who you want to be. When you are ready to serve the public honestly, from behind a desk, call that number. I will personally ensure your application is reviewed. Rourke's hands were shaking as he picked up the card. It wasn't a badge. It wasn't a weapon. It was just a second chance. Thank you, Director, Rourke whispered, voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Malcolm Reed nodded once. Good luck, Mr. Rourke. As the director walked out of the interrogation room, Caleb Rourke sat alone, looking down at the small piece of cardstock. For the first time in months, the crushing weight on his chest was gone. He had lost his badge. He had lost his arrogant illusions, and he had lost his mentor. But as he walked out of the federal building and stepped into the bright afternoon sun, he realized he had finally found his compass. Absolute power, unchecked by integrity, will always lead to a devastating downfall. And sometimes losing everything is the only way to find your true moral compass. Rookie Officer Caleb Rourke learned the hard way that a badge does not make you a hero. Your actions do.